As Jubilee and NASA adherents scampered to make sense of the implications of the Raila Uhuru handshake, I simply recalled the argument that I have made all along, that there is no difference between NASA and Jubilee. In an article that I penned in September of 2015, I was categorical about this when I said, I need to be clear about Kenya because there are no two opposing sides in politics. It is a single political class, a mafioso of tribal warlords, siblings of Kanu depravity, fighting over the spoils left by their fathers and godfathers. That was September of 2015, and in a later article, I went ahead to quote a famous phrase by a former British politician that NASA and Jubilee are two cheeks of the same ass. The coalitions and the attendant tribal parties are led by men, and they are all men. Men of no political principle of whatever shade. All of them are incorrigible liars. All of them are Moi political orphans and Canaanites of the most shameless shade. All of them are incapable of a national vision, and all of them are irredeemably corrupt, and all of them are beneficiaries of state largesse and patronage, and all of them are singularly unqualified to lead this country into the modern era. When called to acknowledge this fact, Raila and NASA adherents would grudgingly concede that those were not exclusively Jubilee sins, but would in the same breath paint themselves as the lesser evil, but an evil all the same. On June 4th, 2016, I had responded to the lesser evil argument between Jubilee and NASA by quoting another commentator who said, if the only choice you have is between the lesser of two evils, all you will get is the evil of the two lessers. You were fed with Jubilee sins, which NASA claimed that though shared, they, NASA, were the lesser evil. Like I had warned way back in 2016, the handshake sealed our fate when it finally delivered the evil of the two lessers. Welcome. This is Matters Arising. My description of the Jubilee and NASA political class in the same 2015 article was this. The government is intellectually, ideologically, and morally corrupt, bankrupt, and inept. The opposition is hopelessly rudderless, cantankerous, and too nostalgic about the pillaged spoils of power they have been shut off from by their younger Canaanite siblings to think straight. While Jubilee failings were obvious to even the most dogmatic of their own adherents, I was categorical that NASA cannot be presented as an alternative to Jubilee because there was absolutely nothing to distinguish them apart from the fact that the Jubilee cabal was on the inside and overeating, and the NASA brigade was on the outside and overshouting. A fact very well encapsulated in the infamous Walanyama quote that reminded them who was on the inside eating and who was watching and swallowing saliva. I did not expect to be believed. Most supporters of either side had been told too many lies, that they were impervious to any other narrative other than what the tribal teen gods had told them. The lies of NASA have now been exposed by the so-called handshake. My take is that if half the things Raila and NASA told us about Jubilee were true, if half of them were true, then the handshake is the greatest act of betrayal of the people in the history of modern Kenyan politics. You see, prior to the 2017 presidential elections, Raila Odinga and the NASA principals had painted Jubilee and its principles literally as the devil incarnate. They had convinced their supporters that opposing Jubilee was a patriotic duty, almost divine. They had painted Jubilee as the great evil, a plague that had infected the country, and that for the very survival of this country and its future generations, we, the people of Kenya, were under a divine obligation to oppose Jubilee and vote them out of power. The argument mutated to the horrifyingly divisive position that those who are supporting Jubilee then were unpatriotic, anti-Kenya, incorrigible tribalists, bigots, unreasonable and ungrateful Raila haters, and beneficiaries of Jubilee impunity. I have to admit, I agreed with Raila Odinga and the NASA brigade that Jubilee is the great evil, a plague that had infected the country, and that the very survival of this country and its future generations depended on its removal from power. I also agree that the sins of Jubilee were so obvious, so grave, and so unforgivable. I have said before that the Jubilee government is the worst thing to befall this country since the Kanu dictatorship of the 80s. Coming at the dawn of a new constitutional dispensation and great possibilities for the nation, the clueless, immoral, and irredeemably corrupt Jubilee government is the worst thing to have happened to a country on the verge of takeoff. My position has not changed because Jubilee has not changed and cannot change. This is an illegitimate regime founded on impunity, and nothing can sanitize or change that fact. Where my position and that of Raila, NASA, and their supporters diverged sharply is a proposition that NASA was the alternative to the Jubilee disaster. I argued aggressively that it was not. To define NASA, you only need to pull the paragraph that defines Jubilee, cancel the word Jubilee, and write the word NASA, and everything else would fall into place. My position was that NASA's demonization of Jubilee was at best dishonest, not necessarily in content, but in context and intention. They made feeble efforts to deny their kinship with Jubilee, but they found it a very difficult argument to sell, at least to the Jubilee supporters. It became difficult for those whose world was divided into Jubilee and NASA to see this rather obvious position. NASA and Jubilee were Siamese twins. The only problem was that Jubilee was eating alone, and the other twin was very, very unhappy. I hate to agree with Jubilee, but they did make this argument that all Raila and NASA wanted was a nusu-mkate government, and the noise would die down. Of course, Raila and NASA denied it until the handshake. In selling the betrayal of the handshake to his supporters, Raila makes the argument that Uhuru and Jubilee are finally fighting corruption. And well, Jubilee made the same argument before the elections, citing several attempts in its first term to fight corruption. Raila and NASA rubbished those efforts, saying that because of its nature, Jubilee was incapable of eliminating corruption in Kenya. Again, I agree with Raila. I have made this argument before to the consternation of Jubilee supporters and cautious approval from Raila and NASA supporters. And the argument I've made is that the inability of Jubilee to fight corruption is not about, or is not because of what they do or what they do not do. It is because of who they are. That has not changed and cannot change. They are an illegitimate regime founded on impunity by fugitives from international justice, and nothing on earth can or will ever change that fact. That Raila found it easy to overwrite this argument, rebaptize Jubilee as credible anti-corruption crusaders, and jump to bed with them can only mean two things. He lied to his supporters about his shared sins with Jubilee and then betrayed them with a handshake. The fact is that nothing had changed and nothing can change about Jubilee. The handshake is therefore not just the delivery of the nusu-mkate government, as we had been warned by Jubilee, but the reuniting of the two lessers. For those of you who voted for the lesser evil, and for those of you who voted for what you were told was the real evil, you've been had. Now, you have to contend with the evil of the two lessers. I have always argued that there is no difference between NASA and Jubilee. After Raila and NASA unsuccessfully pretending that there was, there came the infamous handshake. With it, Raila and NASA abandoned their call for resistance to their shared sins with Jubilee and are now cozying with them in bed. The same guys they call looters and thieves. The handshake exposes the NASA brigade for what they are, a band of liars who demonized Jubilee not because they had the interest of this country at heart, but because they were on the outside, wakimeza mate and overshouting, while Jubilee was on the inside and overeating. It seems to me that the greatest sin of Jubilee was not eating. It was eating alone. Now that they have shaken hands, accepted the nusu-mkate arrangement, all snouts are on the plate, there is an eerie silence in the pigsty. All that is left for NASA and Jubilee supporters to do is to withstand the stench. For Matters Arising, I'm Professor Wainaina.